Everybody, Stephen Clyde here from the Peace and Liberty podcast. We're joined here with Daniel Elwood. Matt, how do you say your last name again?
Wizakowski,
and we got Michael Tabone. We're going to be doing a mock debate today. We're going to be, me and Matt are going to be taking the position of limited government, and Dan and Michael are going to be taking the position of no government at all. Because they're, obviously they're a bunch of psychopaths, and they're going to have to really defend themselves here. So I think to start, I'm going to give Matt the first 5 minutes, and I'll let him do his little spiel, and then we'll kind of rotate from there.
Wow, you are putting me on the spot right away. No
pressure.
I wasn't expecting that.
It's all good. We threw this together last minute, and we just want to hear your first, lay out the foundation for why there should be a limited government.
Okay, so I just got done reading Hans Hermann Hoppe's Democracy, the God That Failed. And there were so many things in that book that were revolutionary to me, as far as just idea-wise. He's an excellent theorist. And in theory, if his ideas were to come to fruition, and everybody, I guess, kind of as a collective decided to live as libertarians, then it would all work, right? I don't see a big amount of people coming together to live into some sort of libertarian covenant, right? And I guess the really the biggest thing to me is I think it's hard for me to even come to grips with some sort of I don't think insurance companies can defend the country. let's just put it that way. Okay. And I understand in theory, in principle, and in well explained ways why maybe competing insurance companies would provide a certain level of defense, and how there would be other insurers that would, and arbiters that would make sure that certain claims were valid and that you couldn't, aggress against yourself and claim, your liabilities from the insurance company. I get that. To me, it's just like, and all of you are going to jump on me. I guarantee it. To me, with the current situation as far as the states that aren't the United States, like Russia or China, I guess, there are a lot of different advanced countries that are running under a status system, a very authoritarian status system, sometimes communist. I think they're kind of inching their way towards capitalism in some way. It's kind of a fascist, in China, especially, I think it's fairly fascist. But it's hard to defend for me to even contemplate being able to defend against that, having several small communes that were independently, privately insured by a particular insurance company that was going to defend against. I mean, China has what, 1.5 billion people? And if they were to work together as a communist state and wanted to take advantage of the United States and this land that we have here, I don't think that if we weren't a collective to a degree, militarily, that we would be able to even defend against that. So I think that's kind of what I want to start out with. I think there's a lot of really good points in that book, and I know how much Tom loves that book, and I got to say it changed my mind in a lot of different areas. But there's just some things I can't grasp, and maybe, I don't know. That's what I got.
Thanks a bunch, Matt, for your intro. I guess the way to do that it makes sense is I'll give both Dan and Michael both 5 minutes each to explain their positions, and I'll take the last 5 minutes after that. So whichever one of you guys just wants to go for a 5-minute round.
Why don't you lead off there, Michael?
You got it, sir. So There's two basic issues that I wanted to touch on Matt's intro, and I think they're two separate issues. One is what Hoppe is proposing, and two, how it would be handled. So there's one issue of what a covenant community or what these things are, how these things would form, and what is he talking about, reality or theory? And the other one is how does it relate to defense of a particular geographic area. So one is Hoppe's theory is again, and like it is a theory. It's not practiced widely throughout the whole entire world right now. But his idea is that there needs to be a very similar culture behind each community, whether they are libertarian or if they're communist or if they are whatever they happen to be. As long as they're voluntary, they don't have to be a libertarian. They can be whatever they particularly want to practice. The Amish are not libertarian, and the Amish are a perfect example of a covenant community that live under their own rules away from the rest of society. They also happen to be pacifists, so I can't use the example of what they're going to do in the event of war because they're pacifists. They don't want to react backwards, right, against an aggressive attack. But you've used them as an example of non-libertarian covenant community. So you'd have tribal setups, more smaller setups, if you want to call them. I don't think that they would have to necessarily have to be locally, have to be localized under one geographic region. I believe that they could be just like we have this association of 4 people from across the entire country. You could also have associations set up the same way from across the entire country. But we do have historical record to go off of individual tribes that were not connected, that worked together during times of crisis to fight off outside forces. The Germanic tribes are a perfect example of tribes that would fight each other, then come together when Rome wanted to try to take over certain areas of their land, and then they would kind of say, hey, let's band together, fight them back, and this went on for a long time. The Germanic tribes are a perfect example. Also, Sparta's neighbors would also say, hey, those guys who are actually able to fight are coming over to kill us. Let's, a couple farmers from a different tribe, from local areas would beat up and fight back, eventually becoming pretty good warriors themselves over the years. But they were not all of the same makeup. They were very much individually different with different customs. So you could say that one was a Christian libertarian, one was a atheist libertarian, one was just strictly ANCAP, one was communist, one was whatever the agreed upon rules are for that geographic area. As I said now, so that goes into the second one. They could band together or have an insurance policy where they all decide, hey, people that live in this area are going to put this much of the insurance policy against this, and therefore we can afford a nuke, right? Area A is going to own this nuke for mutual survival. We're all going to, decide to take a $50 collection together annually to upkeep the nuke, or upkeep the tanks, or upkeep the fleet. This was also a perfect example that was done in Rome and other places. These were private armies that existed as well as the public army. So a lot of people had their own armies. They had their own civilian security forces. They were huge, and they were called in at times of war, and they would often have to get paid by the empire. They would have to get paid by the government themselves. Not stating that you need Rome to pay the private forces, but there were private armies, and those private armies were devastating.
Would you compare those? I don't mean to interrupt you. Would you compare those to just private defense contractors today?
I would say that back then they were technologically sometimes superior, but technologically at least equal to that of what you saw in the actual empire themselves. Today, you don't usually have a private security force that also has access to nuclear weapons or has access to, B-52 bombers or access to, helicopters, stuff like that. So it's not a one-for-one comparison. I'm just trying to give you an example of it's not unhistorically heard of. This isn't just pulled out of nowhere that Hoppy's making this evolutionary step in the theory. But to say that we have to imagine in Hoppy land or in a world where we're saying that we could have a private army that could afford nukes through the use of paying off insurance companies to be able to handle this kind of thing. We're not talking about the world we live in now. We can't, because there's too much of a physical thing. But that's not what we're talking about when we're talking about theory, right? We're also not saying it's impossible. Rome had 1,000, and there's 1 million books that are written by non-libertarians, and libertarians are like that. We are very much like Rome, and that Rome fell, and it fell after 1,000 years. Just because something happened previously doesn't mean that it's going to happen, right? We all think that we're in America and it's going to last forever. Just like the cavemen stood on the flat Earth and they thought the Earth was flat, right? And then we realized the Earth is round, and then some people think the Earth's flat again. But anyway, we evolve past that. We're at the point now where if America did fall apart and we did have to go into small communities, we'd have to figure a way to be able to save ourselves from other countries, right? To be able to save ourselves from other areas. It's not it's a better solution, I think, to do it the Bob Murphy way and the Hoppy way. I think it's a better solution than it is to go back to a state environment, right? The other thing is that's anarchy, really. But if you go one step above us, one step above to where you have countries, they are actually in anarchy because they don't have to answer to anybody else. They only have to, the United States answers the United States. Denmark answers to Denmark. There is no other thing above them. They're actually in a state of anarchy. They're in a state of, there is no more hierarchy, right? If you want to say the UN's hierarchy, it's not really. You can just say, screw you, UN. So
hey, Mike, I'm gonna let Dan hop in now, but
sorry.
You're good. You're good. So I'll just say for Dan, so it's 5:16 now. If you want to go till about 5:21, 5:30, you can go a little over. It's not a big deal, but just around that time frame. So let's see what you got to say, Dan.
So I got a whole hour and 5 minutes. That's amazing. Thank you, Stephen.
Well, yeah, time difference.
Yeah, time difference, as Michael was talking about earlier. So I'm Dan from the Actual Anarchy podcast, and I have a bunch of other properties property is very loose terms, very, very loose terms. I think all intellectual property is theft, or at least
yes, I completely agree with that.
Forced negative servitude.
I'm a software developer, so let me tell you, I believe that to be intellectual property. This is a totally different discussion. So
copyright and international and intellectual property, two separate things.
Right, one's a contract and the other is enforcement against your own property. It's enforced negative servitude. But anyway, I was alluding to the fact that I work on a bunch of different projects, and they all focus on maximum freedom. So that's what I'm an advocate for. And in my mind, maximum freedom means anarchy. It means without rulers, not without rules. And when it comes down to how one would defend themselves or their community or their geographic landmass, like a covenant community like Michael was talking about, I think that we always have to remember that Hirohito wouldn't invade the United States because there'd be a rifle behind every blade of grass. We've already seen this play out historically. Anytime that an invading force has tried to attack another area, the people who live there do band together. They do defend themselves. How long have we been mired in Iraq? How long we've been in Afghanistan? What happened in Vietnam? And on and on. Those people were able to defend themselves with just small arms. And so I don't think that you necessarily even need to get to a point where you have this Robert Murphy chaos theory to even have a big deterrent for an invading force to attack you. Plus, and this is a Molyneux point, they would need to attack you for a reason. What are they going to gain from attacking you? Are they going to extract resources from you? Do they want you as tax cattle? We've already seen an example of a testy situation with taxation approximately 240 years ago now. And those were people who banded together to defend themselves. Now, they, of course, enslaved themselves in the shackles of another government, but at least the notion of that government was to a lesser degree of totalitarianness. Granted, I think a lot of people would, in fact, trade back for the small amount of taxation that they were begrudgingly being enforced upon them as compared to today. I think that the tolerance for the tax question has changed dramatically.
I think you're completely correct about that.
Well, I like Rothbard's answer, right? He's like, well, okay, we'll go back to the way how much money that George Washington was spending. We'll go back to that much. How's that?
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
That's too much for me.
I mean, even Ron Paul was back in, I don't know, when he released The Revolution back in 2008, said, what will it matter if we go back to the levels of spending when it was 2000? I mean, I don't know.
Sorry, Dan. Okay.
Yeah, should I hand off or
take another 2 or 3 minutes. You're good.
All right. So I have read Chaos Theory. I have read Molyneux's Everyday Anarchy and Practical Anarchy, and he talks about DROs, dispute resolution organizations. And I think even David Friedman, he talks about how the cost of violence is much higher than the cost of cooperation. And so in an environment where there are competing security firms or insurance agencies, the ones that are able to come to agreement with others are the ones who are going to win out in a market-based process, because the ones who are going to fight are going to expend their resources much more rapidly. And so there's going to be a natural market mechanism that's going to have the best service providers rise to the top. Because one of the major problems we have right now is that we have a monopoly justice provider in a geographic area. And we all know that level of justice is really unsatisfactory. It's very hegemonic and unilateral. And one bumper sticker type quotation I like is, the more laws there are, the less law there is. There's something like 80,000 pages of regulation in the U.S. Federal Registrar, and I think Trump has been eliminating some. I saw this picture that might have been doctored a bit, where he's cutting 20 regulations for every additional one that they're adding. I don't know whether that's legitimately true or not, but even if it were, he's got a long way to go. So I'll just leave it at that. I think that having a market mechanism be your process for defending individuals and individuals who choose to cooperate together is going to win out in the long run. And even if a state were going to attack this group of individuals, they would have a lot to reckon with for very little benefit. So I'll pass it back to you, Stephen.
Thanks a bunch, Dan. Well, God forgive me for what I'm about to say, because I'm only trying to stay in character. You all are living in a fairy tale land. Where has this ever occurred where a bunch of people have gotten together and most of them have been naturally nonviolent? Where has this ever occurred? I mean, I look around and I think about these facts. I can call 911 if someone breaks into my house right now. And despite how long it takes them to arrive, despite the service, the fact exists that these services do exist. Let's see here. How do I want to defend government? Well, I should have thought about this more. God. Okay, well, let's take this fact. Back when we had feudalist societies, it was really just a bunch of rich people who owned land, and the weak people had to find ways to get access to things like security and stuff like that. And as time progressed, we got smarter, and we realized with a little bit of government, we can make people a little bit safer. Now, whether or not the government erases all violence defeats the point. I mean, you look over time, violence is way down. Crime is overall way down because people have more opportunities. So I guess my question to you all, and I'll direct this conversation back to you, Michael, so we can start off the real debate here. Where's the society ever existed that you're talking about where people can get together and just live happy and have no violence? It seems kind of fairy tale-ish, but I'll let you defend that.
So number one, you live in that world every day. The reason why I say that is it's a fairy tale world to think that that layer that you were talking about, that 911, that the police, that this is a top layer that exists. There's actually another world underneath it, right? That's why crime actually can happen, is because you can't escape the fact that you live in a world of anarchy as it exists. If you wanted to go right now to your neighbor's house and violate the nap, you can totally do that. There's no invisible hand that will, and I'm using that as a pun, come down and stop you from trying to aggress violence against your neighbor. The problem is that you believe that there is a government. Just because the government exists, it's going to stop that person from saying, oh, I'm not going to do it, because the rebuttal of some kind of justice system. But the problem is this justice system, if you go into the statistics, oftentimes 70% of the time doesn't catch murderers, doesn't catch thieves. So a lot of crimes actually go unsolved, or they don't have an actual criminal to go out and point the finger at.
Well, hold on now. I mean, a lot of that does make sense, but when you talk about your non-aggression principle, how does it not violate the non-aggression principle for me to defend my property? For example, if you come up to me and you take my guitar from me, and or say I come and take your guitar from you, and I hold it and I say, this is mine now, and I'm gonna say, what are you gonna do? And
you have to live in a world where there are greatly and understood property rights. It has to be a law that's known throughout the entire land, and it's widely held as a belief. Now,
so who are the arbiters of that?
Well, hold on. That becomes so there is a sticky situation, right? Of who becomes, and you're right. This is exactly the problem, right? Who's the arbiters of that particular situation? So if we look at John Locke, Locke doesn't really talk about this, but there is a sticky situation of who owned, once we have to establish property rights. So at the very start of things, there's just a earth, right? And I walk over to this apple orchard and I say, all right, I'm going to homestead this area. I'm going to mix my labor with this natural part of the earth, and this is going to be mine now. The problem is that, Steve wanted to have that, and Steve can't have that because I did that, right?
And so, you're gonna use violence against me if I come over there. Damn it!
I am going to use violence to stop your aggression, right? Violence for self-defense is okay. And here, the general reason why, and the general reason given why from anarchists, is what you own is yourself. If I own myself, I'm allowed to protect myself. You've stepped on my property, myself. I own me. So that's why when I mix the fruit of my labor with the nature, I'm allowed to say that that is an extension of myself, right?
Okay. Who do you register your property titles with?
Are we talking about in a theoretical society or ours? In ours, we have an illegitimate.
No, theoretically. If in your ideal society, if you were to have this private land that you could, take any action upon any aggressor, who would be the authority that said, yeah, that was his land? He's the person that owns the deed to that land.
So you just mix your labor with the thing, right? Steve comes over, wants to take some of my apples, and I say, no, you can't have any of my apples, damn it. And I take a stick and I chase Steve off my property, right? What gives me the authority to do that from Steve taking that thing? Or where is my property line stop, right? Why can't I just look at everything I see and go, hey, this is all mine, right? I can't, in good faith, walk around to, I don't know, 10,000 acres, 100,000 acres worth of land and actually say that I mixed my labor with all of it. It's impossible for me without the ability of actually mixing my labor with that area. So there has to be a reasonable amount of area that I could see, right? And now we have to arbitrate between Steve and I over that area and his area. Now, if Steve owns the land next to me, it's probably going to have some kind of resource. Otherwise, why would he pick that area, right? If he has a lake or if he's got a pond, he's got a water supply. I got apples. Hey, I think we got something we can trade here. And just as Dan had alluded to before, it's a lot easier for us to cooperate. It's a lot less expensive because there's no violence involved for us just to trade apples and water. It's a lot less violent. It's a lot easier.
But you seem to be taking control over things that existed as a part of nature. In fact, what gives you the right to say you can claim land? Because, you know, extending your theory further, let's say you wanted to claim 2 acres of land, but there's no possible way you could use 2 acres of land at once. I mean, you can only really access what's in your immediate vicinity. So point being, you know, there are some people who own hundreds of acres of land. How do they justify this? Because it would seem that, you know, if someone steps on acre 1 out of 100 and you're like half a mile away, that they can't possibly be trespassing you in a way that's violent. But instead, when we talk about homesteading land, it seems that once you violate the land that someone's homesteaded, you're committing violence against them. But how would you justify that? And I'll pass this off to Dan.
Justifying violence to keep people off of a specific space of land. Well, it sounds like you're making an income argument, my friend. Now, Michael had brought up the Lockean principles, and I think that they're a very good starting point. I have a great article on property and property rights by Rothbard up on actualanarchy.com, and you can find it if you go to actualanarchy.com/natural rights. There's a whole bunch of other articles that are related to this, and it's a question of natural rights versus utilitarianism. Includes some of my color commentary.
I like your site, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
I write for it sometimes, even though I'm not an anarchist.
You totally are. It's fine. I'm kind of alone in this conversation, but I'm really enjoying it. So please continue, you guys.
I'm the realest person here.
Yeah, we won't beat you up too much.
Yeah, you will, but it's fine. I mean, look at what the Eagles did to us last weekend, or a couple weekends ago. So,
I shouldn't mention this, but I think that you can tell what that is. Seattle Mariners. The Seahawks played you guys in the playoffs last year.
Oh yeah, I remember that. That was a couple years ago. That was when Blair Walsh-Smith left. I remember that too. Yeah.
Laces out. Laces out.
Laces out.
So speaking of violence, or the extent of homesteadable land, you know, that's not really my strong suit, but I do know that there are different capabilities or capacities within qualities of land, and that, you know, the homesteading that was allowed in the United States, I think it was something along the lines of 40 acres, and they just used that as a blanket statement for everyone. You know, you get 40 acres of land if you homestead. I don't know if that's the exact number, but east of the Mississippi, you know, 40 acres was enough because the land was nutrient rich enough that you could actually have a small farm there and actually produce out of it. But as soon as you cross the Mississippi and you go west, 40 acres of land is nothing. You know, you actually need a larger land space to raise cattle or to raise some of the more land intensive crops. And so it really depends on the situation of what the land is and what you're able to do with it, whether you're able to band together with others to work the land cooperatively, or you know, within a viable, you know, operation where you're actually producing goods for market, things like that. So it is a bit of a gray area, like Michael was sort of addressing. But I think that the main question that Stephen was talking about was, here you have a nature given thing. So are you not using violence against me by preventing me from also partaking of that natural given thing because you quote unquote homesteaded it before me. Is that basically your question, Stephen?
Yeah, it's basically the question. And also, someone like Kropotkin would argue that, you can only really access what's around you. I mean, how would you, if you have, let's say you have 100 acres of land and you're half a mile away from, 1 acre of land and you're at the other spot, and you have machine guns set up to kill somebody who walks over that 1 acre, but you never access that 1 acre. I mean, it's literally just a block of land that sits there. I mean, it might have a fence around it, but how would you justify shooting somebody under that kind of situation? Because, it does seem reasonable that you can kick somebody off your property, but it seems that the type of justification for homesteading you're talking about gives the right to kill anybody who enters onto your property. But you could own a lot of property, and that property could extend pretty far. Well, would you say it's reasonable to kill somebody if they're half a mile away from you or a mile away from you, and it's an area of land that nobody walks over anyway?
Well, if you had a actual tool that you put on the land and you were fencing it off and all that kind of stuff, wouldn't that be your mixing your labor with the land? So wouldn't you have already done that with that particular piece of land? You would have homesteaded that land if you had put that machine gun there, no?
Oh, I agree. I mean, let me be more specific. Let's say it wasn't obvious that there was a machine gun there. Maybe there was some vague no property sign there, but say it's just a hidden machine gun and you step in this property and you're just shot down. And your family's coming, asking the family, like, how can you justify this? Like, I understand it was your property, but all he did was really step on it. Maybe it was some traveler hiking through the woods and they stepped on your property and oops, sorry. I mean, it was my property. I did put those machine guns there, and they will kill you if you cross over it. But you just got to remember it's my property. It seems a little bit vague on the notion that anarchists are supposed to start from the idea of non-aggression. So it does seem like there's a gray area there.
But there is an issue, right? Of we're looking for something that is equal and appropriate, right? So
Right.
If some guy walks onto my non delineated property, there's no way to know that it's my property or his property or where the line is, or some guy just wanders onto there, and he's not necessarily creating a NAP violation. He's not necessarily creating an issue where they have to be dealt with in a violent situation. There isn't an automatic thing. A guy comes over the thing with an AR-15. He's all set up like this, right? He's looking around on my property. That's one thing, right? That guy's getting mowed down, right? Some guy has a huge hay stick coming out of his mouth and he's just plowing through the field.
Yeah.
You just ride out to the center and you go, hey man, go that way. Not everything has to automatically be met with a violent interaction.
Oh,
Right?
No, when you justify it to the furthest extent, you do have to justify that if someone steps in your property, whether they knew it or not, are justifiable in killing them. I would say that's what you really have to justify. I totally agree that there's very much gray areas that can't really be solved in a discussion.
Okay, so if I could interject just for
Please.
a second. What I'm looking for is the arbiter. Who is the arbiter? Who decides that is your property? You can just go out there and it could be some tribal mentality where you just are at a constant state of war where you're defending property with weapons and all this kind of stuff and trying to maintain your own borders, which is kind of what the state is. But I mean, you could be your own state, right? You could hire these people to fend off a certain area, or you could just claim that a certain amount of area was yours. But who is the arbiter to actually keep track of that?
What do you think? What do you think about that, Dan? I mean, if I step onto your property and you kill me, are you the arbiter or am I?
Well, I don't really think that's the real question here. I think that the question is a proportionate response to the aggression, if there's an aggression at all. Like if you mistakenly
Right,
come on my property, you don't deserve to be shot. Now, as far as the arbiter, I think in present day, the technology exists to have a blockchain style where there's a communal effort or community effort of verification of who owns what and where. And I think that prior to that, there still would be, similar to the DROs or insurance agencies, that they would be providing competitive services, and it would be open to additional providers of that service, so that a system would be worked out and agreements would be worked out. And this is the thing that Ayn Rand got stuck on, and that is that she thought that you needed to have a monopoly on courts, because what if your court and my court didn't agree? Then it's a blank out or a fight, But what she failed to realize is that if there's these two, there can also be a third or a fourth, and they can have prior agreements in place to where if they disagree with each other, they're going to go to a third party that's going to make the decision. And so I think that market structure, like I was alluding to previous answer, is still going to provide the answer here.
Well, I guess this can lead us in a pretty good direction, because now we can talk about how the hell would private courts exist. I was listening to Walter Block and Sam Cedar one time, and Sam Cedar was, nailing Block on this, just saying, so you're telling me, so I'm going to go to one judge and you're going to go to another judge, and if they can't arbitrate it, we're going to go to a third judge, and ultimately we're just going to go into this endless cycle of just finding a different judge, and eventually you would just ultimately want to find the judge that favors you. So how would you even start with thinking about something like that? And I'll give this to Michael.
If I can just, all right, so this will lead into this. So
all right, go ahead.
Locke does say that there are three things that you need, right? You need to have settled known law, you have to have known and indifferent judges, and you have to have a system that would support the sentence of the judges. So you have to have those three things. And there are examples of this.
That sounds like the state to me.
Doesn't have to be. So Ben Powell, Professor Ben Powell, awesome guy down there in the down in Texas, doing some great work. Gave some lectures a couple years ago, and one of the things that he does in his studies is actually study anarchism in practice today. And one of those things was these tribes that exist in Africa, that they're, regardless of geographic location, people know that you're part of tribe A, this person's part of tribe C, and when we have a dispute, we go to the elder of tribe B, and they are the one that arbitrates the whole entire thing. This happens just as was stated a second ago, that if the two don't agree, then you go to the third. This already happens. There's already examples of this decentralized agreement, because you have three things, right? You have a set known law, right? Settled known law. You have known and indifferent judges, like that third party, and you have a way to carry that out, and that would be all of the tribes, right? Tribe A, if I'm part of tribe A and I trespass against tribe C, and tribe B is the arbiter, my own tribe actually has the incentive to punish me, right? Because they want to make sure that they're good with all the other tribes too, right? They don't want to renege on all their agreements, right? So this already kind of exists in some areas.
Well, hold on there. I mean, that does sound interesting, but I've totally lost my thought. Sorry, I'll pass it off to Matt for a second.
That's
totally
a great point.
He concedes.
No, continue what you're saying. Did you have a little bit more to say there?
Steve, are you got it back yet?
No, or no, go ahead, Mike.
No, all right, so that kind of gives you the and I would definitely look up Ben Powell's work. It's tremendously it's really interesting.
Okay, I know what I was about to say. Sorry, I just totally lost my thought there. But listening to all you say this, you sound like a central planner. You sound like someone sitting there saying, I have the answers. For example, I would set up society like this, where people, interact like this. So how would you defend yourself against the idea that you, in a sense, sound like a central planner? Because to be honest, most people are somewhat apolitical in that, they might have basic beliefs, but, they by no means participate in the political process. They never think about these things to that extent. It seems like what you're talking about is only discussed among a few intellectuals that actually think about these things. So how would you defend the idea that you're being a central planner by, talking about imaginary ideas of private societies with privatized everything. How would you defend that, Dan?
Well, then I would I would say that you haven't been listening to anything I've been saying.
Oh man,
because I've been saying a market responds to everything, and a market is by its very nature an unknown thing that's the culmination of millions and millions of transactions by people making voluntary beneficial decisions, mutually beneficial decisions. So if anything, you're being a central planner by even posing this question, comrade.
All right.
I'll concede this one time during the debate. I refuse to concede anymore. And yeah, go ahead.
Well, this brought up were you going to jump in, Matt?
No, go ahead.
No,
well,
Matt,
I wanted
go.
to. Okay, yeah, go ahead, Matt.
I mean, it is kind of a type of central planning. But it's not necessarily central planning. It's central planning in smaller areas, right? Which is the theoretical. Somebody laughing at me?
Oh, just a little bit of central planning, okay?
Yeah, okay, guys. That's what we're gonna do.
All right,
okay.
all right, Dan, go.
All right, just rewind the tape, play back what I said.
Yeah,
spontaneous order. Spontaneous order has two things, right? It's a natural thing that happens throughout all of human history. There's nothing you can do to stop it. It's what controls everything. There is no central planning behind language and music, and just like that with human action, spontaneous order needs two things. One, it needs to be unintended. In other words, there needs to be no central planning. In other words, as try as you might as a central planner might try to control all the variables, there's too many variables, right? And every single time we've seen a central planner try to plan out everything, it fails. I love Rome because Rome is the most perfect example of the state, right? When you think of it, it's got the columns. Everything we use today is meant for that kind of is used in that archetype. Rome tried to have central planners, and yet it couldn't. There was enough spontaneous order around that actually allowed it to persist. We in America persist not because the government exists, but in spite of the government existing. Do you agree, Matt?
Yes, no? Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. No, I hate central planning. In fact, F.A. Hayek and Road to Serfdom taught me pretty much everything I need to know about that. Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt. I mean, central planning is not what we want here, and I don't think that's what anybody is debating. We have Minarchism versus Anarchism, and so to bring it full circle, I mean, it's just tough for me to grasp, and I know Stephen is kind of playing a role here, and he's doing a good job at it. If he were to try to take the negative on something that he wanted to debate in the affirmative. It seems to me that small factions, and I'm kind of repeating myself a little bit here, but when it comes to security, that small factions aren't going to be able to, through private insurance, be able to protect themselves against a much, much, much more powerful aggressor. And then the insurance companies just going to be bankrupt. And who are they going to look to, And who arbitrates these land plots? Who arbitrates property? Who keeps track of this stuff?
Well, I think this can lead into another good topic, which is who's going to stop corporations from taking over? Let's say you get the state out of the existence.
Oh yeah, and they're not going to be angels either, and we know that.
Well, I mean, it might seem far off now, but imagine Colgate toothpaste hires some soldiers, and they start knocking out toothpaste companies. Now they're the only toothpaste company. What's to stop them from doing that? And it seems like you would need a state to stop corporations from getting too big.
You need some sort of entity, but the EPA even has a freaking assault squad or a SWAT team. I mean,
no way.
Yes, they do. If you've read Rand Paul's I can't remember the name of the book. It's his most recent book. I think it's Government Bullies. It's called the EPA. They raid places. They have assault weapons. They buy ammunition. I mean, it's ridiculous.
But
anyway.
Matt, you're supposed to be arguing for government, not anti-government.
we need
No, that's
Just
false.
a few raids.
That's false. I am arguing minarchism. So I am totally against most government activities. However, I recognize that I think there is a role for some government at its very minimal levels, as minimal as possible. That's all I'm asking. So I'm not arguing for government. I think the least amount of government possible is the best situation. I just don't think anarchy or anarcho-capitalism in the Hoppian sense is possible, or even, theoretically something that's feasible in modern day society.
Well, it seems like one thing we all do agree on. We agree that to have any type of society at all, you need some type of similarity between the people's mindset. You can't have 10 different people, 10 different mindsets, because you'd be a perpetual war. In fact, when you look at countries now that have a lot more immigration, they're a perpetual war because they're constantly clashing with each other, all these different cultures. So it would seem one job of the state would be to avoid war. Now, it is true, the government does start some wars sometimes, but
they do it all the time. In fact, just getting done with Hoppy's with Hoppe, sorry, his Democracy, the God That Failed, they're almost incentivized to do so because their leaders are constantly democratically elected, but they're always looking in the short term. They're not looking in the long term. As he would say that a monarch or a king it's his private property, so he's going to look in more of the long term. And so we have these democratically elected leaders, and lots of times they're just special interests are just coming at them, and all they want to do is get reelected. So again, that's not minarchism. That is this democratic socialism, really, or a democratic republic.
Those all sound the same to me.
They do, and they kind of are. So, but I'm not advocating for that. I'm advocating for minarchy, for the least possible in every single way. Shred everything away that isn't absolutely necessary, and we may find that there are differing degrees of where we draw the line. But I guess that's all I have to say on that, really.
Well, I guess we've gone on about 50 minutes now. I guess we can try to get like one last topic in. Let me just look through the list real quick. So we've gone through defense and law. I've gone through security. Well, I guess maybe we could end on taxation. What is the justification for taxation? Well, I would say for a minimal government, you need minimal taxation. Now, take into consideration pre-World War I think our debt was about like $1 billion. And after World War I, our debt was about like $25 billion. Now, it does seem in some sense that when the government's at war, it needs to tax people more, and there needs to be more taxation. So it does seem, as limited government minarchists, we would want to try to stay out of war and stay out of conflicts as much as we could to keep taxes low. So, but the point is, we want taxes to be as limited as possible. And I don't think it'd be an anti-minarchy point to say that we should abolish the income tax. I mean, that's something Ron Paul would definitely say. I mean, you want no income tax. We got by just fine with sales tax or whatever. I mean, all taxes are bad, but to have some taxes, you can acquire that without getting into people's income. So what do you guys have to say for that? And what's your justification for no taxes if you believe in no taxes? How the hell are we gonna make? We don't live in an anarchist society completely. Like we do some things in anarchy. We trade in anarchy sometimes, like Craigslist, but it does seem like we need some protection to keep all we have around us. I mean, can't you give some credit to the government for anything they've done at all to the anarchists?
Sure, I'll give them credit for being a very powerful and significant hurdle in human progress. I'll give them that. They're very good at that, and they're very good at fomenting war. And they're also very good at unilaterally deciding how much of your income belongs to them. And you don't get a whole lot to say in the matter.
Completely agreed.
So I'll lean on Rothbard on this. To assume that you can give a minarchist government all of the taxing power and authority and the final arbitration decision, and then expect them to remain a minarchist government is the utopian stance. If you can't give somebody all the power, that ring of power, you got to throw it into the fires of Mount Doom.
You know, that seems pretty reasonable, Dan. I think I'm finally seeing things through your lens now. And,
you were from the beginning, and I also agree with him.
I'll give Michael and Matt both about like 2 or 3 minutes each to end, and then we'll end there.
So I remember when I was a minarchist. And I would have these same arguments, and I would yell and scream, and no, but we need some kind of that all got torn away from me over 1 week at Mises. And the reason why was I saw enough people that were not, they weren't the neck bearded normal meme sending frog people that I usually interacted with. They were actually professionals and talented people that.
Well, Jordan B. Peterson's supposed to be a frog, right? He's supposed to kind of talk like a frog. Isn't that his deal?
A little bit, yeah. He's got a little bit of that going on. But there were enough, but he's not an anarchist. But there were enough people up there that convinced me that there's more to this. There's a deeper understanding here to look at. And I happen to be an economist, so what was my point? When Dan was talking, he was making a lot of sense, and he was talking about in his last thing.
That's so unlike me.
No, it was very lucid, and it was awesome. I really liked. I was really just, I'm over here clapping and stuff. It was really enjoyable. I forgot what my point was. Oh, one, first off, corporations wouldn't exist without the state. I just wanted to say that. But number two, there doesn't need to be a government. I forgot what my point was. I totally forgot.
I think that pretty much gets the point across. Is there any last things you want to say, Matt, or we can end here in a sec?
No, not really. I really appreciate everybody for coming on here, and I'm probably gonna flip on the game in a little bit and see what happened. But
this worked out absolutely great for the fact that we did this all at the last second. I'm operating off like no notes here, so for that fact, it was a blast, and it's always important to remember that even if you hold to views closely, you still need to reevaluate your views sometimes and have people ask you tough questions. That's a really, really important part of political life if you want to be involved in it at all.
It absolutely is, and I have to say that in my closing statements is that after reading Democracy: The God That Failed, I reconsidered a lot of things, but it's not like every single word resonated with me. I still had my own conclusions about things, and perhaps they're still wrong. I've got a lot of learning to do. And I think everybody does. Everybody needs to continue reading. Everybody needs to continue to pursue new knowledge. And as long as you're open to hearing other opinions and not being standoffish about it, or throwing a ton of ad hominem at people, you're going to learn a lot in your life. And I've learned you know what I mean?
Yep, there are two types of intellectuals. The first type, they're so smart they think they know everything and they can plan society, and they have the answers. And the other type of intellectual, which is the only true intellectual, is the person that realizes there's so much to learn in the world that no matter how much you actually do learn, it really amounts to nothing. And you can never ever plan society. Nobody's competent enough to do that.
Absolutely.
So I want to thank you guys so much for doing this. We did it last second, but it ended up great. It's Stephen Clyde here from the Peace and Liberty podcast, and we'll hope to see you guys soon. Thank you guys so much for doing this.